The arbitration room on the 14th floor of the Hargrove building smelled like recycled air and old coffee. I sat at the respondent's table with a accordion folder in front of me, a cup of water I hadn't touched, and the particular stillness that comes from having nothing left to prove to anyone in the room. My mother sat across from me. My father sat beside her. Their attorney, a man named Clifford Payne, had the kind of practiced composure that comes from decades of making unreasonable requests sound like common sense. He wore a gray suit. He had a yellow legal pad. He hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. I had not spoken to either of my parents in 4 years. The last real conversation ended on a Thursday evening in October, in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, when my father told me that every decision I had ever made was a waste of what they had given me, and my mother stood by the refrigerator and said nothing. Not in disagreement, just in the particular silence of someone who has already made up their mind. I drove back to my apartment that night and sat in my car for a long time before going inside. I didn't cry. I had already done that part. I was 30 years old and I was tired of apologizing for a life my parents had never bothered to actually look at. I left Memphis 3 weeks later. I didn't send a forwarding address. My aunt had known where I was the whole time. Her name was Cecile. She was my mother's older sister, and she was nothing like my mother in any way that counted. She was a retired school teacher who had spent 31 years teaching 8th grade English in Nashville, and had come out of it with a dry sense of humor, an encyclopedic memory for poetry, and a complete immunity to other people's performances. She called me every few weeks after I moved. She never asked me to explain myself. She never asked me to come home. She asked about my work, about whether I had found a good grocery store yet, about whether I was sleeping enough. Once she mailed me a copy of a Mary Oliver collection with a sticky note on the inside cover that said only, "You're allowed to take up space." I kept that book on my nightstand for 4 years. Cecile died on a Tuesday in late September. Her physician called me directly because she had listed me as her emergency contact. She had never told me that. I sat at my kitchen table in Charlotte for a long time after I hung up, looking at the surface of my coffee going cold, and felt the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself as grief right away. It just feels like the floor becoming slightly less solid. Her attorney called the following morning. Cecile had left me her house on Whitmore Lane, a craftsman bungalow on a quiet street in East Nashville that she had owned outright for 22 years. There was also a savings account designated for property taxes and basic upkeep for the first 2 years. She had planned it carefully. That was so like her. My parents found out within 72 hours. My father left a voicemail, then another one. My mother sent an email with the subject line, "We need to discuss Cecile's estate," which I read and did not answer. 11 days later, I was served with a formal dispute filing at my door in Charlotte. The filing argued that Cecile's judgment had been compromised in her final year by grief over her husband's passing 18 months earlier, that I had exerted undue influence, and that the property should revert to her closest surviving family, meaning my parents. I read it twice. Then I drove to Nashville. I let myself into the house on Whitmore Lane with a key Cecile had sent me 2 Christmases ago, tucked inside a card that said she wanted me to have it in case I ever needed a place to land. The house smelled like cedar and Earl Grey tea and the particular smell of old books kept in a warm room. Her reading glasses were on the coffee table. There were student papers on her desk. She had been tutoring neighborhood kids after retirement. I sat in her chair by the front window for a long time. I did not feel like a person who had exerted undue influence on anyone. I felt like a person who had shown up to funerals and phone calls, and the quiet, ongoing labor of caring about someone who was getting older and more tired. I felt like someone who had paid attention. The first time I met Clifford Payne in person was 4 days before the arbitration hearing, outside the records office on 5th Avenue North, where I had gone to pull some property documents. He appeared at my elbow with the deliberate casualness of someone who had planned the approach. He was polite in the way people are polite when they want you to believe they are doing you a favor. He told me my parents were not in a strong financial position. He told me the house represented meaningful stability for them. He said Cecile would have wanted the family to stay together. I told him I would see him at the hearing. He nodded. He smiled with the front half of his face only. The hearing room held a long table, several chairs, and about 20 people who had come because small city arbitration proceedings are genuinely interesting to a certain type of person, and also because my family has lived in Nashville long enough that there was no shortage of people who knew everyone involved. The arbitrator was a man named Harold Osey, late 50s, who had the expression of someone who had heard every possible version of a family dispute and was professionally committed to remaining unmoved by all of them. Payne opened first. He built the argument methodically. My parents had maintained a close and consistent relationship with Cecile throughout her life. They had driven her to appointments. They had handled logistics after my uncle passed. They'd been present in ways that mattered. I, by contrast, had been absent. I had not attended the family Christmas in 4 years. I had not come home when my uncle died. I had sent a card. He said the phrase, physically present, 7 times. I counted. Then my mother asked to speak. She stood slowly, the way she stands when she wants you to understand that standing is costing her something. I had watched her do this my whole life. The performance of sacrifice, the theater of suffering. She told the arbitrator about the worry, the empty seat at the table, the phone calls that went to voicemail. She talked about the years she had given to raising me and the years of silence she had received in return. She was not wrong about the silence. She was wrong about what caused it. Then her voice changed. It hardened in the way it does when she has decided she is done being careful, when she has found a room large enough and an audience willing enough, and she finally says the thing she has been holding. She looked at me. She said I had always taken more than I gave. She said I was the kind of person who shows up only when there is something in it for me. She said that if I had genuinely cared about Cecile, I would have been there instead of building a life in Charlotte that had nothing to do with anyone who raised me. She said that Cecile was lonely in her final years and that I had not done nearly as much as I liked to believe. The room got quiet. Arbitrator Osei made a note. He looked at my folder on the table. He looked at Payne. He said calmly that before they continued, he would like to review any documentation the respondent wished to submit. I brought the folder to the clerk. Inside were 4 years of phone records. Not itemized, just a summary log from my carrier showing regular contact with Cecile's number. Every few weeks, sometimes more. There were the wire transfers I had sent her quarterly, nothing dramatic but consistent. They had covered 2 rounds of roof repairs and a new water heater after the old one failed on a January night. There were the receipts from the 3 weekends I had driven from Charlotte to Nashville when she wasn't feeling well, including once in February 2 years ago when a snowstorm hit, and I slept on her couch for 4 days because I didn't want her to be alone. There were letters. Her letters to me, handwritten, with her specific looping cursive, and her habit of underlining words she wanted to emphasize. And there was a letter from my employer. I had worked for the past 5 years as a senior financial compliance officer at a federally regulated credit union headquartered in Charlotte. My job involved audit preparation, regulatory reporting under the National Credit Union Administration, and training staff on federal compliance procedures. I was not, as Payne had described me, a private citizen with no particular standing. I was someone whose professional life consisted entirely of documentation, accuracy, and the formal record of things that had actually happened. Payne looked at the letterhead for a long time. Osei read through everything with the focused quiet of someone who reads for precision. He paused at the letter. He set it down. He looked at Payne. He said in a tone that was not unkind but was also not gentle, "Counselor, you've described your opposing party as someone who is absent and uninvolved. I'm looking at 4 years of documented contact, financial contributions totaling over $12,000, and 3 in-person visits including one during a weather emergency. Would you like to revise your characterization?" Payne said the financial transfers could represent an attempt to curry favor with the decedent. Osei looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has said something incorrect in a way that requires correction but not cruelty. He said that was one interpretation. He said another interpretation was that they were evidence of an ongoing, caring relationship. He said the documentation did not suggest undue influence. It suggested consistent presence. My father leaned forward. My mother turned and looked at me like I had rearranged my face when she wasn't watching. Payne tried again. He said professional credentials didn't determine inheritance rights. Osei agreed completely. He said they did, however, tend to clarify questions about a person's capacity for careful, intentional action. He said it simply. He said it once. He moved on. My mother said sharply that she hadn't known about any of the financial contributions, that I had never told them. I looked at her. I said, "You never asked me anything about my life?" She opened her mouth. She closed it. Osei upheld the will. The house on Whitmore Lane remained mine. The room cleared in the way rooms clear after something has been decided, quickly, with the particular energy of people who have witnessed something they want to process privately. Payne gathered his papers and left without making eye contact. Several people I didn't recognize filed past the table. My parents stayed seated. I put my documents back in the accordion folder. I stood. I put on my jacket. And for a moment, before I moved toward the door, the three of us were just people in a room with the formalities stripped away, and there was nothing organizing the space between us except history. My father spoke first. His voice was different from the voice he used in the kitchen 4 years ago. That voice had been certain of itself, armored in the specific confidence of a person who believes he is owed more than he has received. This voice was smaller. He asked me if I had really been sending money to Cecile. I told him yes. He asked why I hadn't said anything. I told him that Cecile had asked me not to make a thing of it, that she was private about accepting help, and that I had respected that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he hadn't realized. I told him there was a lot he hadn't realized. He nodded. He didn't argue. My mother was harder. She has always been harder, not because she feels less, but because she has spent so many years inside the architecture of her own version of events that any new information arrives like a structural challenge rather than just a fact. She sat very still. Then she said that calling me the kind of person who shows up only for something in it for myself had been unfair. She didn't say she was wrong about everything. She said that specific part was unfair. I thought about Cecile saying that most people see only the outline of each other and call it the whole picture. I thought about the 4 years of phone calls and the February snowstorm and the sticky note in the Mary Oliver book. I thought about what it costs to be seen incorrectly by the people who are supposed to know you best, and what it costs to keep showing up anyway, and how the two are not the same cost. I told them I was going to fix up the house and that I was planning to spend some time in Nashville in the spring. I told them if they wanted to see what Cecile had left behind, they were welcome to come by. My father said he would like that. My mother said she would think about it. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't the version of this story where everyone apologizes and the music swells and 4 years of silence turns out to have been a misunderstanding that one good conversation can fix. Some things don't fix. Some things change shape slowly over a long time, and you don't get to know while you're in the middle of them whether the shape they're changing into is better or just different. What I know is this. 6 weeks later, my father drove to Nashville on a Saturday with a truck bed full of painting supplies and spent the afternoon doing the trim on the back porch while I sanded the railing. We talked about practical things. The wood condition, the best primer for older siding, whether the vegetable beds along the south fence were worth replanting in the spring. We didn't talk about the hearing, or the filing, or the voicemails, or the kitchen in October 4 years ago. But we were in the same place at the same time, doing something useful. That was more than I had expected. My mother has called twice. The conversations have been short and careful, the way conversations are when two people are both trying not to break something fragile before they've established that it exists. She asked about my job the second time. She asked what exactly a compliance officer does. I explained it. She listened. She asked if Cecile had ever talked about her. I said yes. I said Cecile had talked about her with the particular combination of frustration and love that you reserve for the people you grew up with and cannot fully explain to anyone who wasn't there. I said Cecile had never stopped hoping things would be different. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she hadn't gone to the hospital the last time Cecile was admitted because she'd thought it wasn't serious. Her voice was flat in the way voices are flat when they are holding something underneath. I said I knew. I said Cecile knew too, and that she hadn't been angry. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I know it was the right thing to say, and I know Cecile would have agreed with me on that. The house on Whitmore Lane has good bones. The front porch needs new boards in 2 places. The kitchen was updated sometime in the early 2000s and is slightly ugly but functional. There is a desk in the back bedroom where Cecile kept her tutoring materials, and I haven't moved anything on it yet because it still feels like her space, and I'm not ready to change that. Her reading glasses are still on the coffee table. I'll move them eventually. Not yet. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with inheriting someone's space. It isn't only sadness. It's also responsibility and continuity, and the strange weight of being trusted with someone's accumulated life. Cecile left me this house because she knew I would take care of it, not because she was confused, not because I influenced her, because she had paid attention to who I was over 4 years of phone calls and letters and 1 February snowstorm, and she had made a decision based on what she actually knew. That's what the room full of people heard when Arbitrator Osei read through the documents. That's what Clifford Payne had no answer for. Not credentials, not transfers, not receipts. All of those were just evidence of something simpler, which is that I had shown up consistently in the ways I was able to, and Cecile had seen me. Being seen is not a small thing. Most people go their whole lives hoping for it from the people who were supposed to provide it automatically, and wondering what they did wrong when it doesn't come. I spent 4 years wondering that. I spent 4 years in Charlotte building a life that was genuinely mine. A job I was good at, a neighborhood I knew, mornings that belonged to me, and learning slowly that a life doesn't require an audience to be real. Cecile taught me that. Not in 1 conversation, but in 30 phone calls and a sticky note, and the particular quality of attention she gave everything she cared about. I think about a question I want to ask you, if you're still with me here. Not about inheritance or family disputes or legal proceedings. About something simpler. Is there someone in your life whose actual daily existence you know almost nothing about? A sister, a parent, a child who left, a friend you've decided you've already figured out? When did you last ask them a real question? Not a leading question, not a question you already had the answer to, not a question designed to confirm something you believe about them, but an actual open question about who they are and what they're doing and whether they're all right. Because I was 30 years old and living 4 states away, and nobody in my family knew where I worked or what I did, or that I had spent a February sleeping on my aunt's couch in a snowstorm because I didn't want her to wake up alone. Nobody had asked. And Cecile had known all of it. There's something in that worth sitting with. There's something I've thought about a lot since that arbitration room cleared out and I drove back to Whitmore Lane alone. Not about winning. Not about the look on Clifford Payne's face when Harold Osei asked him to revise his characterization. About Cecile. She made a decision. A clear, documented, legally sound decision. And then she died, and the people who had spent the least amount of time actually knowing her were the ones most certain they understood what she would have wanted. That's not unique to my family. I think a lot of people do that. Fill in the silence left by someone they loved with the version of that person that's most useful to them. My parents needed Cecile to have been confused. They needed me to have taken advantage, because the alternative, that she saw something in me clearly and chose accordingly, meant acknowledging that they had been wrong about me for a long time. That's a hard thing to sit with. I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because I've had to sit with hard things about myself too, and it's genuinely uncomfortable work. What I keep coming back to is this: Cecile earned what she got from me because she gave something first. Not money, not property. Attention. Real attention. The kind where you actually listen to the answer after you ask the question. The kind where you remember what someone told you 3 phone calls ago and you follow up. She treated my life like it was worth being curious about. That's rarer than people realize. And what I gave her back, the transfers, the weekend drives, the 4 days on her couch in a February snowstorm, none of that was strategy. It was just the natural thing that happens when someone makes you feel like your presence has value. You show up, not for an inheritance, not for approval. Because someone you love is getting older and you don't want to waste the time you still have. My mother said I only show up when there's something in it for me. I understand why she believed that. I had been gone for 4 years. I had given her no information. From the outside, with no context, the picture she painted was coherent. The problem was, she had never tried to get context. She had constructed an explanation and then stopped looking. That's what the documents in that folder interrupted. Not her conclusion, but her certainty about it. I think about that a lot when it comes to the people I love now. How easy it is to think you know someone. How easy it is to take a silence or a distance and fill it in with your own fears, instead of asking. I've caught myself doing it. Deciding I already knew what a friend meant by a short text, or what a colleague's quietness was about. It takes actual effort to stay curious. It takes something close to courage to ask a real question and mean it, and wait for an honest answer. The fence is fixed now. The back porch trim is painted. Cecile's reading glasses are still on the coffee table, and I think they might stay there for a while longer. I earned this house the same way Cecile earned my trust, slowly, without an audience. One unremarkable act of showing up at a time. That's not a trick. It's not a strategy. It's just what integrity looks like when nobody's watching.